This is Task Force Zen Radio, and I'm its host, John Krotek, advocate for humankind, education, and commerce. We are on a mission to create human healing on a massive global scale and to tell the stories of people who have dedicated their lives to making our planet a better place to live. Our guest for this episode of Task Force Zen Radio is Dr. Joe Tafur, medical doctor. Dr. Tafur is a true medical doctor visionary. Throughout his entire career, he's been an integrative medicine activist. Graduating from the University of California's Medical School in San Diego, Dr. Tafur worked on collaborative projects at UCLA's Center for Integrative Medicine and the Scripps Center for Integrative Medicine. He's lectured at a number of prestigious medical schools to include the University of Arizona's Center for Integrative Medicine, Yale, University of Southern California, and the Pacific College of Oriental Medicine. Dr. Tafur's exploration into modern medicine's struggles with certain mental and psychosomatic health problems has led him into the emotional and spiritual dimensions underlying these medical issues. Dr. Tafur immediately recognized the broader value of spiritual healing practices used by shamans throughout the ages. He believes spiritual healing is spiritual practice and spiritual practice is spiritual healing, and both can help heal the emotional body and in turn, the mind body. Dr. Tafur continues to spread this very important message at various conferences throughout the world. Currently, he works part-time as a family physician in the United States and continues his educative bridge work through Modern Spirit. We're going to hear more about that, and the Modern Spirit podcast. Welcome, Dr. Tafur. I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very, very much for having me, John.
Well, you know, to get started, just very briefly, because really the show is about your message and about who you are and how you got to where you're at. But a good friend of mine, Vietnam veteran, handed me your book, The Fellowship of the River. We'll talk a bit about that. About 3 months ago, and I couldn't put it down. I think I read it in 48 hours. Probably could have done sooner if I didn't have to get sleep. But I was totally intrigued by the work that you've done and continue to do to help people heal, not only with modern medicine, but also with practices that many would consider spiritual in nature. So, you know, tell us a little bit about your background, doctor, how you got to where you're at.
Yeah, well, you know, in the book, I try to talk a little bit about the story of how I got into all this. But, you know, I'm from Arizona originally, and I had gone at some point. I went to medical school in California, and in medical school, I found myself depressed, you know, which apparently is fairly common in medical school, and it's a whole other issue. What's going on there? But my dad was a psychiatrist, and I was, you know, trying to figure out what to do to get through school and how to feel better. I tried antidepressants a little bit, and it did help me a little bit, but not, it did help me. You know, I found in my case, it was useful for a period of time, but I didn't want to continue like that. I wanted to find something different, something longer lasting, just something deeper. And so I came back to Arizona, where I'm from, to go through peyote ceremony at a place called the Peyote Way, the Peyote Way Church of the Peyote Way Church of God, I believe it's called, which is actually started by a trio of people. One of them is Emmanuel Trujillo, who's a World War II veteran, you know, who apparently had PTSD, what we would call PTSD now, from World War II, and had come back and he has some native roots and came back to Arizona to get involved with peyote, you know, and a large part for his own healing, but then got involved in working with that and teamed up with two younger American seekers at the time, are now running the church. As Matthew Ken and Annie Zapp. Mm-hmm. So that's, you know, interesting enough. That's just what that place was founded on and started on. And so I went there and I had a big shift, and I was really shocked, you know, that I had never, as a doctor or a young medical student, that I had never really, you know, that there was just all this stigma around psychedelics and psychedelic plants. And I had never really been exposed to like their healing potential. And I just found it so powerful and so helpful just in one night of ceremony with that was really gave me the strength to kind of to continue on. It didn't fix everything, but it really helped me. So I started, going back to peyote several times over the rest of my medical school and my residency in family medicine. And I started, learning more and more about psychedelic clinical research that was growing. It was like they had started doing some research again from the 90s onward. So I was in medical school 1999 to 2003. They had started to be, begun the DMT research and started paving the way for the MDMA research for PTSD and now the psilocybin research. All that stuff was kind of popping up. And at the same time, there was a growing kind of scene of the ayahuasca tourism, people going down to Peru to experience ayahuasca with traditional healers in the Amazon. And my family's from Colombia, and so I knew about that. I knew about the traditional healers from the Amazon and their work with ayahuasca, or what in Colombia they call yahe. And because of what I had observed with peyote, I was very curious to learn more about what was with ayahuasca. So in 2007, I went down there and I had a major experience just exploring. And it was really, I was really impressed with not just the practice of it and the art of it and just the whole thing of just being down there, but the kind of results the impact they were having on the people who are largely Americans and Europeans who were coming down there for this healing from this traditional culture.
Right.
And that's when I started I went back and, I was very fascinated. So I went back on my own. And then eventually I brought somebody down with a history of ulcerative colitis that, needed some help, a lot of childhood trauma. And he had a really significant experience there. And then eventually I organized a group. And that's when I took, like this talk about in the book, Russ, a family friend of mine who's a Vietnam vet who was kind of suffering with PTSD, who in 2009 we went down there and he had a major shift, in his symptoms from a 10-day experience, and I just saw Russ like a few weeks ago. So that was 10 years ago, or even 11 years ago that we went down there. And it really marked such a big turnaround for him and his health and his mental health and his physical health. And so it was just an amazing experience, me as a doctor who all the medical students and most of the residents, like you rotate through the VAs, the VA is part of like the medical education system of the United States. So it depends a lot on medical students and residents. So, most people that have been through medical training have been exposed to the VA and are aware of PTSD. They're aware of the issues around, for example, Vietnam vets that they just see as this chronic problem, that it's just not getting better when you're in that scene and in that world. And just to have Russ, who'd been through all that, treatment, what was available to him,
right,
he's turn around kind of rapidly. Obviously he had done a lot of work. He was headed in the right direction. So he had been working towards this, but it was just a pivotal moment for him in his life. And so was a very significant, case on top of the other like psychological problems and maybe less intense problems that I saw people making, gains with, or just very personal issues. I started taking a few more people down. And then eventually I became friends with one of the healers, one of the traditional Shipibo shamans, Ricardo Marengo. And we decided to, along with our friend Svita Mamic, open our own center in Peru. And so then I helped to run that center. And we saw, that center still running. I at the end of, at the beginning of 2017, I stepped down as a business partner, but just to hand it over to Ricardo.
What's the name of the center? Because
it's called Niue Rao. A lot of people have a hard time pronouncing it. Niue Rao. It's a Shipibo phrase, Niue Rao. It's named for a tree. There's a tree that's very sacred to the Shipibo culture that there just happens to be a grove of it on that property, and so that's why the center was placed there. Ricardo chose it for that reason, and also. That's where the healing, La Maloca, the ceremonial space is in the middle of that grove. So it's for that tree called Niue Rao. And so that's why it's called Niue Rao Spiritual Center or Niue Rao Centro Espiritual. So Ricardo continues to run that, and they've been able to run it on their own for the last couple of years. And in that time, I still take groups down there. It's still like a very amazing place to run groups and kind of take people through traditional healing. So, this with Russ, for example, it wasn't just ayahuasca. It was this whole traditional Shipibo approach that involved this diet, this restrictive period, this retreat in the forest, and then multiple ayahuasca ceremonies, and then these other master plants that were given to him to help him out. So yeah, that's the kind of treatment that we offered at Niue Rao, and I observed a lot of healing there of like all different directions, and even some physical healing cases. So that's what the books is about, trying to connect the dots between
Right.
that these people are coming down there for. Why are Americans and Europeans coming all the way down to the Amazon for healthcare? What are they getting down there that they're not getting up north? And what is it addressing that maybe we could learn to address? Maybe not everyone needs to go through ayahuasca shamanism and all that stuff, but what are the elements that are being addressed, and how can we learn from that?
Yeah, a couple of questions that you raise here. I know that you had in the book, you pointed it out, you had an early interest in the integrative medicine. And for those that don't really understand integrative medicine, can you expound on that a little bit, Doctor?
Yeah, that was part of my frustration, I think, in becoming a doctor. Probably was just that I was interested in what people call holistic healing.
Right.
So what we're talking about is healing that involves not just the physical body, but is also addressing. Well, I mean, there's so many elements of it. So we have what we call allopathic medicine, the MD, the medical doctor, that's kind of been very much the main authority or in charge of a lot of the healthcare that's going on. And then we see that system of thinking, we're all aware, is very effective for certain things, but sometimes falls short for other things. And so there's all these first was just all the other traditions, right? So you have like a Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and so with acupuncture and herbs as an example of another tradition where people are very trained and advanced in their training. Then there's things like naturopathic medicine, which is another form where people are getting advanced degrees in the United States to be healthcare providers. Then you got a lot of other, many things. There's even the body workers. We could call like chiropractic, which is considered fairly mainstream, but that would be considered, outside of the allopathic model. That going to a chiropractor may not necessarily be covered by your insurance. It's just a little bit outside of the standard of care for some people. So there's all these other traditions and practices, and then a lot of them they have not just different techniques, but they have different philosophies of how the body works, how health works, and some of the things that Western medicine maybe wasn't paying enough attention to previously, like lifestyle, like nutrition, like the role of psychosocial stress in any number of diseases, not just mental health problems, but in heart disease and high blood pressure and other problems.
Even
So
like aromatherapy, they found that in like the pyramids.
Well, so then these are ancient traditional practices, right? So we have like aromatherapy, and then there's energy healing, all kinds of forms of energy healing, all kinds of forms of spiritual healing. There's the role of prayer in medicine and all that, faith healing, all those kind of things. So there's just this huge, number of traditions out there of people trying to help other people. And so, there was a movement, I guess, in the early 1900s in the United States. That's what I hear about, like the Flexner Report. It's kind of like this movement to standardize things and institutionalize things in an effort to stop what they would call like charlatanism, snake oil salespeople. So these people are getting fooled, people are getting fooled by this phony medicine and healing. So now we want evidence-based medicine, and you can't just go around telling people, I know how to do this and I know how to do that. You've got to prove it, or at least prove it to some standard that whatever the institution that's around is going to say that's the standard. So that, that's how a lot of stuff got kind of left out. And so this issue of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that there was a lot of really powerful healing techniques or powerful medical knowledge that was disregarded and left out. And so then when people are doing normal, Western medical care, and they're not able to get the results that they're looking for. And then they want to look what we call outside of the box, they're going to try acupuncture. They're going to try aromatherapy. They're going to try these things. That was kind of seen first. We call that alternative medicine. That was considered alternative medicine. And then they started calling complementary medicine. And now we kind of refer to it as integrative medicine, in the sense that we're trying to integrate all these different techniques into a larger medical understanding, which would make room for all these different pathways for people to get better. That's based on results. That's based on something like effectiveness. So it's this issue, because sometimes people see, maybe they're conservative minded, or they think they're conservative minded, or they call themselves conservative minded. And so they think, oh, that stuff, that's too weird. That's too different for me. But then when we're talking about results, that's the true conservative perspective.
Yeah. I got to tell you right now, I'm conservative minded, but
Yeah.
I was extremely fascinated, and I have had experience with some of the things you have mentioned. I was extremely fascinated how, the foundation of trauma and how it affects the spirit. And I think you mentioned in the book how the shamans say that a person would lose their soul. And
Well, yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No. And how the various plants and in the forest, to include the tree you talked about, how the plants were able to create this bridge back to find the soul, to help fix or basically heal these emotional reactions to trauma, and then to integrate it back into what you call the mind body. And I got to tell you, Doc, I am Joe conservative here, and this is all high value.
Well, and that's what I think, I'm all for it. You know what I mean? That's my point, is this message is universal.
Yes.
And so I'm just saying how sometimes people will be a little closed-minded because they're worried that they're straying too far out of their belief system, And the point is that this is just about healing, which I feel is a very universal concept. So when we look at like a PTSD type of problem, and what we talk about, in the Shipibo tradition, this idea that, let's say, a child that's really traumatized or very scared or frightened, or even an adult in a very serious, traumatic situation, like, let's say, combat, that they would potentially, that the fear would be so intense that, as they would put it, and as we would understand it from a spiritual perspective, which, may not make sense to people, but it's a way of talking about things, and it's a way of looking at things, is that the soul would be kind of scared out, just not feel safe anymore to be embodied, to be in this life, the trust of just moving forward in this life is just kind of lost. And so then there's if we look at that, what people describe, the way this traditional person would describe that soul loss, what people call soul loss in some different circles, is that that person would just kind of lose a sense of themselves, lose a sense. They feel empty inside. They don't feel motivated or passionate about life. They don't feel engaged, like from a heartfelt sense in life. And so then the idea is that person, you need to help them kind of basically clear out and heal like all the energies of the associated trauma, and help them work through it, so that you can invite, their soul back into being, what they call soul retrieval. So there's a lot of interesting kind of parallels in Western medicine when you talk about PTSD, or first of all would be like in a childhood traumatic situation where people have, and even later in life where people have repressed memories, where they actually just totally shut down. They can't even remember what happened. So that's like a dissociation, which is related to what the traditional people would call like a soul loss. So they're dissociated. And there's different ways that could manifest at the physical level. One way is that your brain, and it's like, we know that your brain is filtering out like a lot of what's coming in. A lot of the perception is being filtered out, either perception from the outside world and also perception from the inside, from how you feel in your body. What does it feel like in your heart? What does it feel like in your guts? What does it feel like in your legs? All that kind of stuff is constantly being filtered and integrated.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways that you could shut down. Your mind can turn off the switches to your feelings, so to speak, where you would no longer feel. You would not feel the same way that somebody who, let's say, doesn't have that kind of history would feel. And so that kind of goes along with this idea of this soul loss experience, and we even have, there's even like, we're learning more like how the neuroscience, like how the brain, the default mode network would maybe be involved somehow in the kind of mental scarring that goes on around trauma that would detach people from their embodied sense of how they feel, what it's like to be alive, et cetera, et cetera. So then when you open that stuff up with psychedelic treatment, carefully, under a lot of guidance and all that kind of stuff, you see people, a lot of times people repressed traumatic memories come up, repressed emotional experiences come up, and now you can work on those things and work through those things, with a lot of care. And somehow that process kind of parallels like what traditionally we would also be in the midst of trying to help somebody like regain their soul, invite their soul and their being back into their body, allow themselves to feel what it is to be alive in the present, instead of being blocked off by past trauma where so much of their sensory experience is guided by the past.
Well, it's interesting because I was raised in an era where they showed these commercials on television that showed like an egg frying in a frying pan, and this is your brain on drugs. And so anybody that I ever knew that did psychedelics, they always seemed to be having a good time. But, I was scared to death to even venture into that world. Of course, when I was in college, pot and marijuana didn't seem to make you crazy. And even my own recovery period with the traumatic brain injury from an alcohol-induced accident back in 2012, CBDs helped to save my life. I was able to, medical grade, prescription grade, I was able to get the sleep that I needed. The usual route of Prozac to get me sleeping again made me more suicidal.
Right.
And of course, in that journey, this is, it opened me up into something new. And especially, I'm telling you, your book has really got me going. But I had repressed a childhood assault that had occurred to me between the third and fourth grades. And of course, the traumatic brain injury brought it to the summit and spun out of control. And now I'm back on track. But everything that you've said is exactly right in line with how you can really integrate all of these different things to bring that soul back. And that's kind of where I'm at in my life right now. And that's why I'm intrigued by your work and all these great things, and I will make it down to your center. I've already been in contact with Santiago, so we'll see how we can make that happen. But let me ask you this. So
it's not mine anymore. It's Ricardo's, but
but you started it, man. So
I helped start.
But we appreciate that. This is phenomenal work, and people are coming back to it. I'm reading now where government contracts are being signed. There's more research coming back again into the psychedelic world. And, but let me ask you this, as a person that started a treatment center, in the jungles of Peru, in a really cool area near Iquitos, let me ask you this. What do you think about some of the folks that might be out there that are selling the experience as just selling the experience, and they're going, what do you think about that? Because
there's tons of that. Okay. So it's like, I think we gotta be educated and we have to be careful. And so, you can't just be foolish in life. Okay. Whether that's with alcohol or any of these things, there are just consequences that we have to warn young people about. We have to warn people who are unaware about. And so in Peru, they're like the attitude where it's legal, okay? So it's legal to offer this, and you can offer this to foreigners. They expect the amount of personal responsibility expected of the average person in Peru is much higher, I would say, than here. In other words, if they see somebody, a foreigner, coming out to the middle of the jungle where they don't speak the language, they don't know the culture, and they're just going to randomly pick somebody to drink this like extremely mind-altering substance with, to see what's going to happen. No matter how desperate or, but I mean, that kind of falls out to the wayside as you realize they had to take a flight, across the world to get there. They put the responsibility on the person. They're surprised. Their attitude is like, they don't have that kind of naivete in their whole country. Nobody would do that. They're not sure they'd be surprised if people did that here in their own country, to go up to somebody that you don't know their language, you don't know their culture, and you're just going to sit down with them and drink this mind-altering substance and see what happens.
Right.
You know, so people need to be very careful. And so, like I said, it's legal over there, and I think it should be legal. You know, and we have the same issues around alcohol and some of these other substances that are available, and people need to be educated and they need to be very careful about it. So there is plenty of problems in Peru with ayahuasca. There's plenty of people people are very poor over there, a lot of people. And so they're trying to take advantage economically of the situation, some of them. And some of them they're sexual predators that are trying to see if they can get some women over there to come under the influence. So those things are very real and people need to be warned about those things. That being said, there is a medical tradition. There are people there that are serious about this and helping people. And there is a spirit and a root to that side of this tradition, indigenous tradition from that area with ayahuasca. That's very beautiful and very powerful. And so those places are, out in the open, places like Niue Rao, where there's a number of centers that have, reputations. And there's iAdvisor, and there's these websites that are going up to try to help guide people to finding safe places, to go through this kind of experience. So I think people need to consider their safety.
Definitely some great points. So let's just say I am a person that has struggled with post-traumatic stress, and I've read your book, and I decide that, and I'm booked to go down there at Niue Rao in near Iquitos. Right. Can you describe what that person can expect and what the process would be to do that, Doc?
Well, so there's like a series of steps, to see if are you a good candidate for this kind of treatment, number one. So you got to consider somebody's psychiatric history. Have they ever had any psychotic episode? Have they ever had a manic episode, like a bipolar type of episode? That's a major issue. That could be a real problem on ayahuasca. And so for the most part, that stops it right there. They wouldn't want you to come down in the jungle and try your luck with that kind of history and see what happens.
Right.
Next is, the medical condition. So it's heart disease. Are you at risk of heart attack? Would you be somebody that could potentially get in a stressful ayahuasca ceremony, have a heart attack? Would you be somebody that might be at risk of stroke? Is that an issue that you need to worry about? So you got to kind of check out the safety. Then there's medications. Is a person on any kind of medication? What is that medication? And, what's the plan around taking that medication? And is that contraindicated for work with the plants? So there's a screening process. That's first. Then you got to think about, okay, are you ready to go through this? And what kind of support do you have, coming home? So we see that it's really important in the integration process when people go through a big healing in an international setting and they come home, they need some kind of support, whether that's a supportive family that's ready to help them, or it's some people with more professional skills, or a spiritual community, or let's say a psychotherapist, or some other resource that might be available through the VA or somewhere else. In the case of Russ, he came back and he ended up entering this integrative PTSD program they had at U of A, at University of Arizona. So before, he didn't quite feel ready to participate in that kind of thing and really kind of give more to the therapeutic process, but afterwards he was able to.
Right.
So I think the integration process is just a very real thing. And there are people that have had really miraculous experiences, and other people, probably most people, need more, longer term care and work to make the most out of that kind of treatment. So I think those are the things that people should really think about before they try to head down. They want to be as honest as they can about what they've been through, what they've done, as with the treatment team there, so that they can help them to the best of their ability. So then you show up, you fly down there, you go to Iquitos on a plane from Lima, and then you get picked up at the airport, and you get taken out an hour and a half in a moto taxi. It's like a tuk-tuk, like a moto taxi, out to the jungle, to a retreat center that's out in the forest. That's Niue Rao. And then you're going to kind of settle in over there, and eventually you're going to have to start your process. And this traditional Shipibo process means you're going to take a vomitive, a mix of plants that's going to make you throw up, just to start your process. Because the idea is that the traditional healing involves a lot of a lot of cleansing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
There's a purgative element, like, and there's a purification, and there's a sacrifice of just, okay, you're going to really simplify things down and focus on working on yourself. And so that includes your diet and what you're eating. So there's very strict there with the diet, according to the traditional belief system, that's the diet has a major impact on how well you can receive treatment from the plant. So you're on your diet, and then you meet with Ricardo or one of the lead shamans to talk about why you've come, you know, and how they want to kind of organize your treatment. They probably will assign you some kind of master plant. That would be an additional plant that you would take that wouldn't necessarily have any psychoactive, whatever, response in you, but will help you through your treatment, depending on what's going on. And then you start the process, which is being on the diet, the restrictive diet, taking your plants every day, being in retreat in the forest, and then the ayahuasca ceremonies. So those happen 4 nights a week there at that Niue Rao. You don't have to drink ayahuasca at any of the ceremonies, or definitely not all of them, but they're available, and that's where the ceremonial healing happens. And the idea is to go through your experience with ayahuasca or without ayahuasca and to receive healing song from the shaman. So there's this energetic healing component of doing this spiritual healing. That's ceremonial, and that's what's being done there. And that's what is getting a lot of results with a lot of people. So there's a lot of different forms of ayahuasca healing, ayahuasca shamanism throughout the Peruvian Amazon. The Shipibo culture is one of the cultures that's really sharing their techniques with people. And there's a number of centers that are based in Shipibo medicine in Peru. And, that's what I try to talk about in the book a little bit, because I went through training with them to learn about those techniques and to practice them. That's where you start really bringing that element in. And so you need, just a couple notes, like you need a safe space, to do this kind of work. So that's one of the things that's missing in some of the Western contexts, like here in our culture. One thing that's missing, even in a lot of spiritual settings, is a safe place to be vulnerable, and in other words, without judgment, beyond all judgment, truly spiritually, like conscious. So in other words, it doesn't matter what you've done or what you haven't done. It's like, this is going to be about healing. This is going to be about forgiveness. This is going to be about a deeper compassion, to get people in touch with a deeper gratitude and a deeper self-love. So that's what's so important. And that's why, this nature-based spirituality that's kind of driving it is coming from that kind of place. That the natural, the spirituality that the nature encourages is beyond judgment, and that's very important, and that needs to be made available to people, because the idea that you can access divinity that way, and come into connect to your faith without necessarily, being lost in judgment over your past, over the things that have happened. And so that's just a little piece of, like, what's so major about having like a spiritual healing retreat, and that way that setting can really help set the stage for people to do this deep healing work. And I think the same is true about, and I've been exposed and I've been to the training for the MDMA assisted psychotherapy, that their sessions are very much along those lines. It's helping people come into that state that, like I said, unfortunately, like some people, even from their own spiritual background, they still don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable enough to work through stuff, and they need a lot of support, and that's the idea.
These patients that you mentioned, I know I'm one of them, but these patients that you mentioned that are seeking something deeper than just the proverbial treatments, and you mentioned, I don't think you can go down there just one time and think you're going to get the fix and you're finished. And so you say, you believe that there's a longer period of time to be in contact with these types of traditions.
Most important thing is that a longer time to be in touch with your healing process.
Right.
So this might be a major moment in your healing process. And so you may require, more treatment from that approach to help you, especially if it's something that has been so helpful. Some people, they get so much from it. They want, okay, I want to go do some more work. Other people, it helps them find help through other healing, but they stay connected to their healing process.
It is fascinating because, there's documented case after documented case after documented case. And the Shipibo, shamans, they didn't just spring up yesterday. This is traditional methodologies that go back for since maybe the beginning of time, but, with humanoids anyways. But so what are the barriers here in America? You mentioned the peyote, American Peyote Church of God. What are the barriers here in this country? I mean, is it possible to ever have a treatment center here where people do feel comfortable?
Yes. Well, first, I don't know if you probably have seen it, but I'm not sure if you've seen From Shock to Awe, the movie.
I have not.
You need to see it and tell people about it. It's right up your alley. So From Shock to Awe is a movie made about some combat vets that have severe PTSD, and it's about them and their families. And these guys start out the movie talking about how they open their medicine cabinets and say, here's the 80 prescriptions that we were prescribed at the VA for the last 2 years, and I hate them, and they didn't help me. This is just what they're saying. It wasn't helpful, and so they're very frustrated about their care. And so then they both moved into marijuana. Like you have the CBD or whatever it is, but marijuana related products that made a huge impact on them, was a huge relief for them in their process, and kind of got them off medications, and was the side effect profile was such that it was just more helpful to them and they could live their lives a bit better. And then they wanted to go a step further. They felt like they kind of plateaued with the marijuana as far as what they were going to get out of that. And so they wanted to explore ayahuasca in this case, and also MDMA assisted psychotherapy. So the two guys go through ayahuasca treatment at Soul Quest in Orlando, Florida. So Orlando, Florida, Soul Quest is a place that is a spiritual healing center where they offer ayahuasca, and they offer it to vets. And they made a whole movie about it. They applied to the DEA for a religious exemption to allow them to do this, to do ayahuasca for spiritual reasons. And the DEA has not said no, but they haven't said yes. And it's been over 2 years. While they've been waiting to hear back from the DEA, they made this movie, From Shock to Awe. And it shows these guys and the kind of the amazing healing process that these couple guys achieved with the ayahuasca work that they did there. And then also a big, one of the guy's wives went through MDMA as psychotherapy, and just the remarkable kind of progress she made, at least just through one session. And obviously needs more work and continue to work on it. But, that's the whole movie is kind of a plea to like, why aren't we making this kind of stuff available to people?
Well, it's definitely moving in the right direction. That's a start for sure.
It's moving in the right direction. So, I mean, it's just the issue is, so there are people who want to bring that here. I mean, I'm not saying that's the perfect place or that's everything they do there is correct or right, but they're boldly trying to help these guys, and these women when against the stigma that we were talking about, so the issue is, okay, yes, I get it. I don't think everybody should be doing psychedelics and everybody needs to do psychedelic plants. Like, I'm not promoting that, but they have a role, to be, and they can be extremely helpful to some people in overcoming trauma and, probably a number of other things. And so there's a lot of clinical research here in the States that's supporting that. So MDMA assisted psychotherapy, that trial, that research is growing. They're looking at FDA approval within a year is what they're saying right now. So they are, yes, that's a fact. That's maps.org, maps.org. You can learn about that study. They started with a lot of sexual abuse victims. Now they're going into combat veterans and firefighters and police. So trying to help, again, the conservative elements of our society that are facing a lot of trauma, all these brave individuals from our, culture that end up having to face all this stuff. And so that's who they're targeting. They're talking to the Pentagon, and they're talking to all these people of making these, how can these treatments be made more available? So they're going through a process with the FDA. So that's coming up. But, so that's going to be, then there's work around trying to have those psychotherapeutic traditions learn from this ancestral cultures. What can we learn from Shipibo shamanism? How can that help people in psychedelic psychotherapy? So that's going on. I'm part of that dialogue, and a lot of other people are too. So meanwhile, there are also a number of other churches that want to come into the scene to ask for permission from the DEA to provide ayahuasca as a spiritual healing, practice under religious exemption, the same way that peyote is also exempt for the Native Americans from the war on drugs. So, those are examples, really very real examples that are coming into the United States. Yeah.
Well, it's phenomenal work, Doctor, because, even with Task Force Zen, we're healing without labels. It's kind of our mantra to tell the stories and things that are actually working to help people lead better lives. We're advocates for humankind. We're traumanauts. We're exploring, we're pushing the envelope to educate. To me, it's all about the education. If we can get it out there, and I know that's a big part of your mantra as well. In light of all the great work that you've been doing and continue to do and hope to do, what's your hope for humankind?
My hope for humankind right now, like the message, what we're working towards. And so, I would just want to say I honor Task Force Zen and what you're talking about, healing without labels. And it's just about helping people find, what works for them. And that's just about caring. And so what I see going on is like something that I'm a part of right now that is really important to me, and kind of bridging, like you were talking about, my work with basically Native American culture in South America. And now we're bridging that work to work with Native Americans here in the United States and trying to find ways to heal, just like the trauma across the board, for everyone. And part of that is like bringing back some ancestral wisdom, what you've been talking about, like all this great Shipibo techniques, etc. But the ancestral wisdom that was very much alive, let's say, in Native American culture, which is that, health and spirituality are the same thing. That's the same thing. And so when we're trying to understand, like, how to evolve our spirituality, then, health becomes a very important indicator of that. How healthy is the person, living? How healthy are their relationships with their intimate loved ones? How healthy is their relationship with their community, with their society, and with their ecosystem? Like that becomes the guide for what is ethical and what is unethical. And so we can tell, like, okay, these are spiritual practices that are helping people's health. That community that's trying to do these things. It's like we can see all these indicators that the individuals are healing, that their families are healing, that their community is healing, that their ecosystem, is recovering and is improving. And so that's a big message that I'm a part of, is to try to bring back a universal spirituality, or at least make it accessible, the concept to people, and have that be about their health, about their mental health, about their physical health, about their emotional health, about their well-being, and how that's really like the focus of spiritual practice. The entire purpose of spiritual practice is to nourish our spiritual well-being. That's what it's for. It's not just to follow rules and, I don't know, there's social networks and things like that come out of people's spiritual communities, which are very important. But what is really the root of what their practices are about? The root of their practices should be, I think, for their well-being. That's how we would learn more and gain more. And that's what a lot of the spiritual traditions teach us, and the ancestral traditions. And then that it ends up being reflected, and this like more peace and harmony within the person leads to more peace and harmony out in the society and the community. And so I think just go ahead.
No. That's fascinating because, what you're talking about, Doctor, is a global health consciousness with a foundation in spirituality, which makes sense. I mean, and I get the feeling, when we have guys like you on the front lines and some of the other people that you've described, I get the feeling. I think there's a general sense out there, again, maybe very hopeful, maybe I'm naive, but I get the sense that people are really, really, really starting to open up again.
I think so too. And what it comes down to, and that's why I think From Shock to Awe, I think just for you and for your listeners, I think it's a really important movie to see. And I'm not saying like you step in the right direction, like you said, I'm not saying they have all the right answers, but it's really important to see. And one of the things that as we bridge these two things, health and spirituality is like this guy, one of these guys. So these very brave, it's like, it's very inspiring movie because these are the brave soldiers. These are the guys that we're all inspired by the bravery, of these Americans and what they're, and you see how they respond to their treatment and how brave they are to go into the ceremony and what they're willing, they're just going to go for it. And, unfortunately, they get sent to do this and do that. And whether that was an ethical decision or not from the powers that be, but that's where these guys find themselves. And so then they're recovering from the trauma, from what they had to do or what they're asked to do. And this guy has this wake-up call, like after his ayahuasca healing, where he's just like, oh my God, like our society has become a repository of trauma,
Absolutely.
That the traditional culture, the traditional way is, let's say, from Native American culture, or, it's not a denial of trauma. It's like, they had a warfare, they have all kinds of things. There's tragedy that comes through, it happens. But they realize you have to grieve those things. You have to heal through those things. Like there has to be a sacred space that's opened up for people to work through that stuff without judgment and heal for the sake of their health. That if you don't do that, then it starts to accumulate in the society. And you start to see this kind of spinning out of control. You start to see things start to kind of families start to break down, all of a sudden some common sense concepts about like what it means to take care of children starts to fall apart. And then what about the water supply? Oh, well, who cares? Let's poison it. All these, just like really, really kind of what you might consider twisted ways of being start to kind of develop and show themselves. So then we realize that in order to come back to a place of like, wiser decision making, you have to heal that trauma. And so healing trauma is a huge part of what spiritual practice is about.
Absolutely.
Because part of what we have to deal with in this life, in our spiritual lives, and our soul's journey is like we are going to deal with, whatever circumstances we're born into and all the other terrible things that are going to happen. And one day we're going to die. And so then the reality is there that we have to kind of figure out, well, what are we going to do with that lifespan? How are we going to work through this stuff? Are we going to be able to get somewhere, to make some kind of progress where we can feel some kind of satisfaction, over our existence? And so it turns out that healing our traumas is like a consistently what we observe in this kind of work. And maybe these people, they end up reconnecting, like this whole thing, this soul retrieval, like you're talking about, they end up feeling a lot more connected to the possibilities of life, to the positive things, to the hope, to the joy, to the love, that we're all kind of hoping to experience more of. Like that seems way more accessible to the person whose trauma has been healed.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I mean, it's I like that, I don't know if it's groundbreaking because it's always been here, but I think it's becoming more and more accessible, like you say. Let me ask you this, Doc.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do you have a personal mantra that you live by every day?
I was looking at your questions to see. I don't know. I need to come up with something like that.
You've got one, man. I know you do.
Well, I mean, the mantra that I've been spreading around, and I don't know if it's, but it's just, that's what I'm kind of working with right now, is the one that you mentioned that I've been saying, just, spiritual healing is spiritual practice is spiritual healing. So that's just, I like to say that. One of the reasons I got started saying that is because when we were trying to see about getting legal protection to do ayahuasca,
right,
and they're saying, well, you can't, if you're going to go to the DEA, you can't call it medicine because that's the FDA's, department. You got to call it your sacrament. You got to call it just the sacrament, basically. You can't call it medicine. But I was like, well, the traditional people, they consider it a sacrament. They consider it a totally sacred thing, and they call it medicine. And that's the traditional way. Like, it was not like, we're not just making that up to, like, confuse you. That's the way they've always said it. and they call peyote medicine. It's a sacrament and it's a medicine. And then, in fact, they also call Icaro, healing song, medicine, and they call prayer medicine, and they call ceremony and ritual medicine. So it's just like, it's about bridging those things again. It's realizing the reason that we're doing those things is not just for like feathers and, to confuse people. It's like, it's about healing. It's about healing their souls, what you're talking about, soul retrieval, putting ourselves back together again, remembering, like one of my friends says, like you got the dismemberment, you got to remember, put everything back together again. So to me, that's really important. Spiritual healing is spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is spiritual healing. So just because I'm talking about healing doesn't mean that it should be restricted to the area of medicine, of like whatever, FDA and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about healing, which may involve, my soul, my whole being, the kind of caring that people would have for their own children. They're not going to restrict. If the child tells them that they feel like their heart is broken, they're not going to say, oh, the heartbreak, what is that? Yeah, how do you measure that? That doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I love that spiritual healing is spiritual practice.
It's
spiritual practice, spiritual healing.
Spiritual healing.
And so if listeners want to find out more about Dr. Joe Tafur, how do they do that? How do they find out about Niue Rao? And how do they find out about getting a copy of the Fellowship of the River?
Sure. So there's one more thing I want to share about is just real quickly.
Sure.
So I have drjoetafur.com is my website. It's kind of underdeveloped, but there's stuff on there to link to the book and all that kind of stuff. And you can find those things. And I'm trying to put events and things that I'm doing there. Then I have modernspirit.org. Modernspirit.org is
let's get it. Well, we can get into that. Very briefly, Modern Spirit. Tell us about that.
Modern Spirit is a nonprofit dedicated to demonstrating the value of spiritual healing in modern healthcare. So that's just so like what we're talking about, what we've been talking about all hour, is just how to bridge this stuff, and just not make it just two separate worlds, but one universal world. And so one of the things that we're doing is that we need help with. We have a crowd fund to raise money for the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project. So the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project, so I mentioned the MDMA study for PTSD that they're doing. And these people, like what I told you about Russ's case in Peru with this Vietnam PTSD, these people who are in this study have had an average of 17 to 18 years of treatment-resistant PTSD. Then they go into the MDMA assisted psychotherapy trial where they do 12 weeks of therapy and just 2 or 3 sessions of MDMA. I think it's 3, but in this particular protocol that they have with the therapist. And at 1 year follow-up, they have almost 70% of them no longer have PTSD.
That's incredible.
So it is totally incredible, and it's just it's just the beginning of the studies. We don't know. They're trying to expand the study numbers so that we can learn more and see how consistent these results are. But that's why, because of the results of this study being how they are, is why what we were talking about earlier, that the FDA is doing this breakthrough therapy fast track for them. And that's why there might be, hopefully within a year, come up with a way for more people to access this kind of treatment. So we are collecting saliva samples, Modern Spirit is, on the people going through that study. And when we collect the saliva samples, we're going to analyze, which we've already started to do. When we're done, we have all the numbers together, we're going to analyze those in a laboratory epigenetically. So that's a whole other topic, but basically the bottom line is epigenetics is about how your genes are regulated. So it's not necessarily changing your genes, but it's changing the way that you're regulated. And there's all this evidence that trauma can affect the way our genes are regulated. And it has this biochemical reality of like the way that these things are modified, these molecules around the DNA get modified, and it affects the way the genes are expressed. And so that's one way we're still learning about how trauma, like from let's say Vietnam, could cause some imprinting in the epigenetics that would be stable and would stay with the person for decades, and affect their physiology, affect their stress response system, affect how they are, triggered and overreactive to, stress in general.
So then when somebody has this treatment-resistant PTSD, like in the case of the people entering this trial, there are 2 decades, and then they see a dramatic shift, that is like, whoa, and it's measured and documented. We have reason to believe that there would be some shift at the physiologic level, at the biochemical level. And the epigenetics seems like the area where that shift would happen. There's other research to also indicate that that would be possible. So the idea is we're trying to see, and when you talk to the people who are going through the treatment, well, they have these huge emotional healing experiences, and many of them have kind of mystical, spiritual experiences, going through the psychedelic treatment. And so the idea is we are trying to see where this spiritual and emotional healing touches the flesh. And so that's why we're trying to record this epigenetic change that might be happening in these people who are having these really dramatic PTSD healings, which would likely be similar to what people are experiencing down in Peru, when these people have these big turnarounds with their PTSD. So that'll help us have a way to kind of bridge the biomedical model and this emotional and spiritual healing work. So that's what we're trying to do. So it's a big deal, and we're trying to raise money. There's a crowd fund, modernspirit.org. You can find the crowd fund and help us raise the money we need to do the analysis. We should be able to analyze it later this year, hopefully.
That is phenomenal work. We're definitely going to be a missionary for that project because, I know all about disassociation. I disassociated from that trauma that I suffered at such a young age for 42 years. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that made many imprints all through college and all kinds of different things throughout my life. But the trauma of the TBI is what brought all that to a forefront. And the work that you're doing, Doc, I got to tell you, it's so badly needed in today's complex world, where I totally agree with you that we become a culture of trauma, but we're not dealing with it. And you're on the cutting edge. Your colleagues and you deserve great kudos. I know you're not finished yet. I know you're busy, but I mean, phenomenal work. So people can go to drjoetafur.com
and modernspirit.org.
Okay. And then also Niue Rao. Does that have a website?
Niue Rao has a website, Niue Rao. If you want to head to Niue Rao, NIHUERAO.com.
And then the book, that's what started all this for me, was your great book, The Fellowship of the River.
Please read the book. Please buy the book. It's on Kindle. It's on Audible. You can get it on Audible. It's me reading it. Put a review on Amazon if you get a chance, spread the word. So it's Fellowship of the River, a medical doctor's exploration into traditional Amazonian plant medicine.
Hey, are you working on any new books?
Hey, I don't think so. I mean, everyone asking me, and I needed to do, but it just took me forever to write that book. So I don't know if I could write another, but I would like to, but it really took me forever. And I need to have a life is my problem. I'm too busy.
No, I get that. And you know what? One thing that's phenomenal about you that I absolutely love, and for those that are going to listen to this, spiritual healing is spiritual practice. Spiritual practice is spiritual healing, and you're on the cusp of, I think, probably one of the greatest shifts in humankind that we'll ever see. I feel it coming. A lot of people do, and hopefully that, by networking, by using these great technological tools, we can use them in a way that benefits all of us. And, the biggest thing that kept me from ever reaching out to do anything, Doc, quite honestly, was the stigma associated with the type of trauma. And I even knew it at that age that I'm not saying anything to anybody because I'm going to get labeled with not doing that. The social stigma that kept me hidden in this shadowy world of nonsense cost me a lot, and I hurt a lot of people in that process. And when you lose your soul, you drastically or you desperately try to find it again. And when I found your book, it gave me a little bit of my soul back. So thank you for that.
Well, and that's just it. It's like we're all ashamed. We're all ashamed, and we all have reason to be. But part of the problem around certain kinds of, whether it's PTSD or certain kinds of trauma and abuse and the shame around that, part of what was so scary for people to deal with that is because they didn't feel like you could ever get better from something like that. And that's the real, I don't know, that is a part of it. And so now that it's becoming clearer and clearer that you can, You know, if you thought you couldn't, or somebody told you couldn't, or whatever, on top of the shame of just the whole all of it, it's just like, that's what we're trying to let people know, that this healing isn't just like a blah, blah, blah. It's real, and many people are doing it, and there's many ways to get to it. Like you're saying, healing without labels. And so we want to encourage people that, you know, it is available, and it is worthwhile. And it can be very beautiful, you know, to go through such a healing process.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Doctor. And, you know, I've got a hashtag for you. Dr. Joe Tafur, the Spiritnaut.
The Spiritnaut. Oh, the latest.
No,
okay.
man, I'm just.
Spiritnaut. Okay. That's better. I like that better. That's cool. And you know what is that I say a lot to people is psyche, you know, psyche.
Yeah.
Is like from the Greek, and a lot of people translate that as mind, because like psychology and whatever, psychiatry. But my understanding of what psyche means in Greek is soul.
That's really cool.
So I like Spiritnaut.
Dr. Joe Tafur, the original authentic Spiritnaut, out there to save the world and to lead people and lead them down the right path. And I'm just blessed to know you, and I look forward to the day that we can meet in person, because I know we will.
Right
people on this.
Thank you for all your kind words.
No, and I mean them. I'm not.
What you're trying to do, just spreading it around. You know, doing this work just to help people. It's really wonderful.
Well, thanks, Doctor, and good luck on everything that you're doing. And if you need any help on our end, I'm here. I'm in the Spiritnaut Corps with you. But you know, I'm here to help as much as we can. And again, I do appreciate you, and God bless you, and thank you for your book.
Thank you too. God bless you too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Task Force Zen Radio. Through education, we will raise global awareness, create more balance, perpetuate human healing, and diminish suffering in our world, because humankind matters.